Hello everyone, this will be the 13th chapter of The Second Life of the Guardian, written and read by Insect Overlord. This chapter is titled, It's Not Lying, It's Avoiding the Truth, and has content warnings for mentioned kidnapping, mentioned child death and mourning, and mentioned drowning. Izuku sat in Oburo's office, fiddling with a slinky. Oburo had started their session by handing Izuku some homemade macaroons. Izuku had damn near started crying. He hadn't had macaroons since the day before he died. He stuffed his face gratefully. Now that the snacks were eaten, Izuku had no excuse not to talk, only he didn't know how to start. So much had happened since his last session. His sleepless nights, his shutdown, meeting Shinso, his appointment, Katsuki. So, yeah, Izuku had no idea where to start. Lucky for him, Oburo was a therapist and had a lot of experience with that. So, Izuku, has the melatonin been helping you sleep? Izuku groaned. No, I'm still just as tired as ever, he grumbled, and I keep having nightmares about Akumas. Izuku had explained all that was Hawkmoth's brain to Oburo during his last session when he first brought up the nightmares. Oburo hadn't understood fully, couldn't understand fully. It was something you had to live through, but was supportive in helping him recover. Oburo wrote something down on his notepad before setting it aside. Would you feel comfortable sharing what the nightmares have been about? He asked. Izuku shuddered. The most frequent one had been an overlap between a case he solved as Anon and an Akuma. The case was on a group of siblings, aged 7, 9, and 14, who had been kidnapped on their way to school. Someone had nabbed the youngest and pulled her into a van, which caused the others to react, trying to get her back. Suddenly, they both went limp, and the kidnapper was able to load them into the car and drive away. The whole thing was caught on a security camera of a nearby shop. Izuku was only able to figure out who the criminal was thanks to the faint purple glow of his hands before the children went limp. He had used the keywords purple, glow, and paralyzed to search him up on the National Quirk Registry. He informed the police, and the guy was caught, the siblings mostly unharmed. It was shockingly easy. Izuku was sure the only reason it had gone unsolved for 3 weeks was because the victims all had quirks that gave them the features of a lizard. What had messed with Izuku's mind was the glow on the man's hands, and the terrified look of the children as they learned they couldn't control their bodies. It was achingly similar to the Akuma Longing. There was an Akuma. Her name was Longing. She had just lost her son the week before and couldn't handle the grief. Izuku started, stretching his slinky. She wasn't like any other Akuma I fought. She didn't try to fight me. She did beg, though. She begged me to leave her alone. Begged me to stop fighting Hawkmoth because she didn't want any more children to die. Izuku pushed the slinky back together harshly and squeezed it in one hand to hear the crack of plastic. When she cried these huge purple tears. If you touched them, they would paralyze you. During the whole ordeal, she never stopped crying. Izuku paused and Oburo waited, sensing this wasn't the end of the story. She was akumatized in a busy plaza. Her friends had taken her out to lunch to cheer her up, but she saw something that reminded her of her son. I don't remember what it was, maybe a dinosaur plushie, but it sent her over the edge and she started sobbing. When she turned into Longing, her tears gushed out like a waterfall, and all the people around her were subject to their effect. Izuku began twisting the slinky into a tangled ball. I think this Akuma was worse than the more deadly ones, because at least with those, the civilians would die instantly when hit with their power. With Longing, anyone her tears touched would drop to the ground, unable to move, only to slowly drown in her endless purple tears. The slinky snapped. Izuku stared down at the plastic pieces in his hands. Oburo waited for a moment, leaving space for Izuku to continue if he wanted, before responding. Thank you for sharing with me. That sounds like it was really hard for you. Izuku nodded. He didn't want to talk about this anymore. He dumped the slinky pieces onto the table beside him and started lining them up from biggest to smallest. I went to the doctor. They said I don't have a quirk, Izuku said. Oburo, not commenting on the sudden subject change, asked, Oh, how do you feel about that? Izuku shrugged. I don't really care. I can still be a hero. Kachon cares, though. He said it makes me useless, and he started calling me Deku instead of Izuku. Oboro frowned. That's not very nice of him. Kachan is Bakugo-san, right? I bet if you told your parents, they would get him to stop. Izuku groaned. You don't know anything about being a kid. I've been one twice, and I know that if I do that, it won't help anything. It certainly had never helped with Chloe. You don't know until you try, right? Oboro chuckled. Izuku focused intently for a moment on making his slinky pieces perfectly spaced, before responding. I do know, and I have tried. I had a friend from before who acted the same as Katsuki is now, telling the adults did zip. Oboro frowned, but didn't argue. From there, the topic moved to lighter things, like Izuku's new friend and the cat he found under a park bench. He told him some guy had picked her up to take her to the vet, but left out how his vigilante counterpart knew the man. It wouldn't be good if he blabbed about actively breaking the law. This concludes Chapter 13 of The Second Life of the Guardian. I know this one was really short. I apologize for that. But anyways, the next part's to be up soon. Thank you so much for listening.